When the lawyer handed over the deed to a rotting, weed-choked farmhouse, her family laughed out loud. They took the mansions and the millions, leaving her with worthless dirt. But they had no idea that beneath the decaying floorboards lay a secret that would permanently shatter their elite dynasty. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Abernathy, Cohen and Pierce, located on the 42nd floor, overlooking the grey sprawl of downtown Boston, smelled of lemon polish and old money. Rain lashed relentlessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting gloomy, shifting shadows across the faces of the Pendleton family. They sat around a massive, polished table, their expressions a mixture of feigned grief and barely concealed greed. Nora Bennett sat at the far end of the table, making herself as small as possible. At 28, she was the glaring anomaly in the room. While her Aunt Beatrice wore a tailored charcoal Prada suit that cost more than Nora's car, and her cousin Harrison repeatedly checked his solid gold Patek Philippe watch, Nora wore a simple, slightly faded navy cardigan. She was the black sheep, the daughter of Arthur Pendleton's estranged younger son, and the only family member who had actually bothered to sit by the billionaire's bedside during his final, agonizing weeks at Mass General Hospital. Thomas Abernathy, a senior partner with silver hair and a voice like dry gravel, adjusted his spectacles and broke the heavy silence. He broke the seal on Arthur Pendleton's final will and testament. Arthur was a man of distinct tastes and precise intentions, Abernathy began, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the document. He wished to make it clear that this division of assets is final, irrevocable, and completely immune to contestation. We will begin with the primary estate. Harrison leaned forward, a hungry gleam in his pale blue eyes. Beatrice simply folded her manicured hands, her posture rigid with expectation. Arthur Pendleton had built a real estate and logistics empire worth an estimated $800 million. The pie was massive, and the wolves were ready to feast. Abernathy read through the legalese with methodical slowness. The Pendleton Holdings corporate umbrella, the flagship Manhattan high-rises, the sprawling beachfront estate in the Hamptons, and the liquid cash accounts in the Cayman Islands were cleanly divided between Beatrice and Harrison. They received the crown jewels of the empire. Harrison let out a low, victorious breath, practically sinking into the leather chair. Beatrice offered a thin, self-satisfied smile, her eyes darting briefly to Nora with a look of undisguised pity. And finally, Abernathy said, his tone shifting slightly as he turned to the last page. He looked up, his gaze locking directly onto Nora. To my granddaughter, Nora Bennett. The room grew incredibly still. Harrison stopped checking his watch. Arthur has left a personalized addendum for you, Nora, Abernathy said, sliding a thick, yellowed manila envelope across the smooth expanse of the table. I am instructed to read it aloud. Abernathy cleared his throat. To Nora, the only one who remembered that I was a man before I was a bank account. You have always understood that true value is rarely found in the light. Therefore, I leave you the entirety of the Willow Creek property in upstate New York. The deed, the land, and everything that resides upon it are yours. Do not sell it. Look closer. A beat of silence passed before Harrison burst into a loud, braying laugh. The sound bounced off the elegant mahogany walls, sharp and cruel. Willow Creek, Harrison choked out, wiping a fake tear from his eye. Are you kidding me? The old dairy farm? Beatrice let out a derisive scoff, shaking her head. Good heavens, that property has been abandoned since the late 80s. The barn roof collapsed a decade ago, and the soil is completely toxic from agricultural runoff. It's a 60-acre mud pit, Thomas. The taxes alone will bankrupt her in a year, Harrison added, looking at Nora with a wide, mocking grin. "I guess Grandpa really wanted you to get back to your roots, Nora. You always were the charity case. If you want, I can give you the number of a scrap-hauling company. They might give you a few $1,000 for the rusted tractors out back." Nora's cheeks burned. The humiliation was a physical weight in her chest. She had not expected millions. She never wanted his money. But the public degradation stung deeply. Arthur had held her hand in the hospital, looking at her with such intense clarity, just hours before his heart failed. Why would he do this, she thought. Why leave me a rotting liability while they get the empire? "The deed is transferred," Abernathy said, ignoring Harrison's outburst. He looked at Nora with an unreadable expression. "It is yours, Ms. Bennett, completely free and clear of any corporate liens. Whatever is there, it belongs solely to you." Nora stood up, her legs trembling slightly, but she kept her chin high. She reached out and took the manila envelope. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," she said quietly. "Enjoy the farm, cousin," Harrison called out as she turned to leave. "Try not to get tetanus." Nora walked out of the towering glass building into the pouring rain. She climbed into her 10-year-old Honda Civic, the engine sputtering in protest, before finally catching. As she drove out of Boston, navigating the slick highways toward the New York state line, the tears she had held back finally fell. She felt completely abandoned. But beneath the sting of her family's mockery, the final words of her grandfather's letter echoed relentlessly in her mind. Look closer. 2 days later, Nora pulled onto a violently potholed dirt road just outside the forgotten town of Oakhaven. The rusted wrought-iron gates of Willow Creek Farm hung off their hinges, groaning in the brisk autumn wind. The property was a nightmare of overgrowth. Thorny briars choked the cracked driveway, leading up to a decaying Victorian farmhouse that looked like a stiff breeze would flatten it. The wraparound porch was collapsing, the windows were shattered, and a terrifyingly decrepit concrete silo loomed in the distance like a broken tombstone. She stepped out of the car, her boots sinking immediately into the thick, dark mud. Harrison was right. It was a wasteland. But as Nora looked at the crumbling facade, she set her jaw. She had nothing left to lose. She was going to tear this place apart until she understood why Arthur Pendleton had given it to her. The first week at Willow Creek was a grueling test of endurance. Nora rented a dingy room at the Oakhaven Motor Inn and spent her days covered in grime, tearing down rotting plaster and hauling out decades of raccoon-infested garbage. Her hands were blistered, her back ached constantly, and every night she went to sleep wondering if her family had been right to mock her. The farmhouse was practically a biohazard. On her 8th day at the farm, a severe late-season thunderstorm rolled over the valley. The sky turned a bruised purple, and relentless rain began to batter the fragile roof of the house. Nora was inside, desperately placing plastic buckets under the worst of the leaks in the second-floor hallway. As she moved toward the old master bedroom at the end of the hall, a loud crack echoed through the house. The ceiling in the corner had given way, sending a torrent of cold water crashing onto the hardwood floor. Nora rushed over with a heavy tarp, but as she stepped onto the soaked floorboards, the rotten wood splintered beneath her boots. With a yelp, Nora's leg plunged through the floor, scraping painfully against the jagged wood. She cursed, struggling to pull herself free. As she shined her heavy-duty flashlight down into the hole to inspect the damage, the beam of light caught on something completely out of place. Nestled between the dusty, mouldering joists, wrapped in heavy industrial plastic, was a thick, matte-black metallic box. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She completely forgot about the leaking roof. Grabbing a crowbar from her toolbox, she aggressively pried away the surrounding floorboards, ignoring the splinters digging into her palms. She hauled the object out. It was shockingly heavy, easily 40 pounds. Wiping away the dust, she recognized the engraved logo on the side. Diebold Nixdorf. It was a high-grade tungsten steel lockbox, the kind used by private security firms for transporting bullion. The box had an old-fashioned combination dial and a biometric thumbprint scanner that looked entirely dead. However, on the side, there was a manual keyhole shaped in a strange, asymmetrical zigzag pattern. Nora sat back on her heels, her mind racing. She opened the manila folder Thomas Abernathy had given her. Inside, along with the deed, was a heavy brass key she had assumed was for the front door of the house, a door that hadn't even been locked. The key had the word Archimedes faintly etched into the metal. With trembling hands, she inserted the brass key into the lockbox. It slid in perfectly. She turned it. A heavy, satisfying mechanical thunk echoed in the empty room. Nora lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was no cash, no gold. Instead, there was a thick, leather-bound ledger, a set of highly detailed topographical maps, and a smaller cylindrical metal tube. She opened the ledger. The handwriting was unmistakably her grandfather's, sharp, hurried, and precise. The first page read, "Beatrice and Harrison are vultures. They value only what shines in the sun, and they have no patience for the dirt. Their arrogance is their blindness. I have spent 30 years preparing for the day the world shifts, hiding my true legacy where their vanity would never allow them to look. The empire they inherited is built on debt and fragile markets. What lies beneath Willow Creek is absolute." Nora flipped through the pages, her breath catching in her throat. The ledger detailed a double life. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a real estate magnate. During the late 70s and 80s, anticipating global economic instability, he had become one of the world's most aggressive and secretive collectors of hard, physical assets, and he had systematically buried them off the grid. She unrolled the topographical maps. They didn't show the farmhouse. They zoomed in on the northern ridge of the property, specifically the ruined, collapsing concrete dairy silo that Beatrice had scoffed at. The map revealed a cross-section of the silo. The visible concrete was just a shell. Beneath it, plunging 50 feet into the bedrock, was a reinforced subterranean structure. The storm raged outside, but Nora couldn't wait. She grabbed her raincoat, a heavy spade, and her flashlight, sprinting out into the torrential downpour. She fought her way through the thick, thorny brush, her clothes tearing as she reached the base of the towering, ominous silo. According to the map, the entrance wasn't inside the silo, but buried beneath a false concrete slab 10 yards to the east. She found the spot, a patch of earth curiously devoid of deep-rooted trees, covered only in thick moss. Nora dug furiously. The rain turned the dirt to heavy, suffocating mud. But she didn't stop. After 20 minutes of exhausting labor, the steel blade of her spade struck something that rang with a dull, heavy metallic clang. She cleared the mud away with her bare hands. Beneath the earth lay a massive, circular steel hatch, resembling a submarine door. At the center was an electronic keypad, utterly dead, but beside it was a heavy industrial wheel lock and a manual override slot. Nora pulled the cylindrical metal tube from her pocket, the other item from the lockbox. Inside was a specialized, star-shaped titanium crank. She fitted it into the override slot and turned with all her body weight. The gears, heavily greased and sealed from the elements, ground in protest before finally giving way. With a monumental heave, Nora spun the wheel. The pressure seal broke with a loud hiss of escaping air. She pulled the heavy hatch open. A concrete stairwell plunged down into absolute darkness. But as the hatch locked into the open position, a mechanical trigger engaged. Deep below, a generator hummed to life. A profound, low vibration shook the ground. Suddenly, a row of bright industrial LED lights flickered on, illuminating the stairwell all the way down. Warm, heavily filtered, climate-controlled air rushed up to greet her. Nora descended, her boots echoing off the concrete walls. At the bottom of the stairs, she stepped through a secondary blast door and stopped dead in her tracks, her flashlight dropping from her numb fingers. She was standing on a catwalk overlooking a cavernous, immaculately clean underground facility, easily the size of an airplane hangar. The floor was polished epoxy, and parked in neat, mathematically precise rows below her were silhouettes covered in custom, moisture-wicking dust sheets. She walked down the metal stairs, approaching the first shape. She reached out, pulling the heavy fabric back. Gleaming under the harsh LED lights was a flawless, metallic silver 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR Uhlenhaut Coupe. Nora wasn't a car expert, but she knew enough to recognize one of the rarest vehicles on the planet, a car rumored to be worth nearly $150 million on its own. She pulled back the next cover. A pristine, cherry-red 1962 Ferrari 250 GTU. There were at least 30 cars in the room. Just the vehicles alone represented a fortune that dwarfed Harrison and Beatrice's entire corporate inheritance. But as Nora's eyes adjusted to the vastness of the bunker, she realized the cars were just the beginning. At the far end of the facility, past the multi-million-dollar fleet, stood a massive stainless steel vault door from the Federal Reserve, its heavy locking bars firmly engaged, waiting to be opened. Nora stood before the towering Federal Reserve vault door, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline of discovering the multi-million-dollar fleet of classic cars. The polished steel of the massive door reflected the harsh LED lights of the underground bunker. According to the leather-bound ledger her grandfather had left in the floorboards, the combination was not a random string of numbers, but a specific date. The exact day Nora's father had died, a tragedy that had permanently fractured the Pendleton family and left Nora an orphan. She reached out and grasped the cold steel of the rotary dial. She spun it left, right, and left again, inputting the 6 digits with methodical precision. A deep, resonant click echoed through the cavernous space. Nora grabbed the heavy iron lever, leaned her entire body weight backward, and pulled. The massive circular door, nearly 2 feet thick, swung outward on heavy pneumatic hinges with a sigh of pressurized air. Nora stepped inside and gasped. If the car collection in the outer hangar was a fortune, the contents of the vault were an absolute empire. The room was lined from floor to ceiling with heavy reinforced shelving. Stacked on the left were rows upon rows of blindingly bright, perfectly cast gold bullion. Stamped with the insignia of Credit Suisse, each 1 kilogram bar represented hundreds of thousands of dollars. There were hundreds of them, but it was the center of the room that truly took her breath away. Resting on climate-controlled pedestals were custom-built archival crates. Nora unlatched the nearest one, lifting the lid to reveal a breathtaking oil painting. Even without a formal art history background, she instantly recognized the signature in the bottom corner. It was an original Claude Monet, a vibrant, sweeping landscape of water lilies that had likely been reported lost to private collectors decades ago. Beside it sat a velvet-lined case holding a shimmering, diamond-encrusted Fabergé egg. On a small steel desk, in the very center of the vault, sat a single manila folder, identical to the one Thomas Abernathy had given her in the Boston law office. On top of it was a handwritten note. "My dearest Nora," the letter began. "If you are reading this, you have passed the test. You did not sell the mud, and therefore you have inherited the earth. But this vault is only half of my final act. The second half is the trap I have set for the vultures." Nora sat in the leather chair behind the desk, her eyes scanning her grandfather's hurried, sharp handwriting. The letter outlined a financial maneuver so ruthlessly brilliant it made her head spin. Arthur Pendleton had realized 10 years ago that his corporate emperor, Pendleton Holdings, was heavily over-leveraged and bleeding cash due to Harrison's reckless acquisitions and Beatrice's catastrophic mismanagement of the retail divisions. Instead of saving the sinking ship, Arthur had secretly accelerated the collapse. He used the inflated corporate valuation to secure billions of dollars in massive high-interest offshore loans. He then quietly laundered that liquid capital through shell companies in Geneva and Singapore, converting the cash into untraceable physical assets: the gold, the bearer bonds, the art, and the cars, and buried them beneath the toxic soil of Willow Creek Farm. "I left Beatrice and Harrison the crown jewels," the letter continued, "but what they do not know is that the crown is made of lead. The Cayman accounts they are so proud of are currently being frozen by international creditors. The Manhattan high-rises are collateral for loans that will default in exactly 14 days. They inherited a $2 billion debt bomb, and when it detonates, they will have absolutely nothing. The only unencumbered, debt-free asset in my entire portfolio is the 60 acres of dirt you currently stand beneath. Protect it." Nora's mind raced. Her grandfather hadn't just made her wealthy. He had given her the ultimate power over the very people who had spent her entire life mocking her. But she knew she couldn't handle this alone. The ledger provided one final instruction: a business card for a man named Gregory Hayes, a senior private wealth manager based out of a highly exclusive firm in Zurich, Switzerland. Using the encrypted satellite phone she found in the desk drawer, Nora made the call. Less than 48 hours later, a sleek, unmarked black helicopter touched down on the overgrown northern ridge of Willow Creek Farm. Gregory Hayes stepped out. He was a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 50s with piercing grey eyes and an aura of absolute discretion. He did not flinch at the mud or the decaying silo. When Nora led him down the concrete stairwell and opened the vault, Hayes simply adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and let out a long, low whistle. "Arthur always told me his final act would be biblical," Hayes murmured, running a gloved hand over the hood of the 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. "Ms. Bennett, a preliminary, highly conservative estimate puts the contents of this facility at roughly $3.4 billion, unregistered, untaxed, and entirely off the grid." "And my family?" Nora asked, her voice steady. Hayes offered a tight, predatory smile. "As of this morning, the walls are closing in on them. Deutsche Bank has called in the loans on Pendleton Holdings. Their stock is currently in free fall. It is only a matter of hours before they realize they are bankrupt, and only a matter of days before they realize where the actual money went." Nora looked around the gleaming bunker, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. The timid, quiet girl in the faded navy cardigan was gone, buried somewhere in the mud above. She looked at Hayes, her eyes cold and clear. "Let them come," Nora said. "We'll be waiting." The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. Nora was sitting on the sagging front porch of the farmhouse, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. The property looked vastly different than it had a week ago. Following Gregory Hayes's rapid deployment of funds, the rusted gates had been replaced by reinforced steel. The perimeter of the 60-acre farm was now heavily monitored by a team of elite private security contractors from Aegis Defense Services, discreetly positioned in the tree line. A convoy of 3 black, armored Cadillac Escalades came tearing down the potholed dirt road, slamming on their brakes as they reached the new security gates. The doors flew open, and Harrison stepped out into the crisp autumn air, his face purple with rage. Beatrice followed closely behind him, clutching a designer trench coat around her shoulders, looking utterly frantic. Accompanying them was Richard Caldwell, a slick, aggressive corporate litigator known for bullying inherited wealth out of vulnerable targets. Nora walked down the driveway to meet them at the gate, flanked by Gregory Hayes and 2 heavily armed security contractors. "Open this gate immediately, Nora!" Harrison screamed, gripping the steel bars. The solid gold Patek Philippe watch on his wrist caught the morning sun, though Nora now knew it was likely one of the few things he truly owned. "You lying, manipulative little thief! We know what he did. We know what you made him do." Nora took a sip of her coffee, her expression maddeningly serene. "Good morning, Harrison. Aunt Beatrice. You're looking a little stressed. Did something happen with the Cayman accounts?" Beatrice let out a sound that was half sob, half shriek. "He ruined us. The banks are seizing the Manhattan properties. They locked the doors to the corporate headquarters this morning. He saddled us with $2 billion in hidden liabilities, and you knew. You coerced a dying man into funneling the real capital out here. My client demands immediate restitution," Caldwell, the slick lawyer, interrupted, stepping forward and pointing a manicured finger at Nora. Arthur Pendleton was clearly not in his right mind when he executed that addendum. "We are filing an emergency injunction to seize this property and everything on it. We know there is an underground facility. You will sign the deed over to Pendleton Holdings immediately to satisfy the creditors, or we will tie you up in litigation until you are completely bankrupt." Nora didn't flinch. She turned to Gregory Hayes, who simply opened a slim leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it through the bars of the gate. Caldwell snatched it, his eyes scanning the document. As he read, the aggressive, arrogant sneer vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, chalky paleness. "What is it, Richard?" Harrison snapped. "Tell her she's going to jail." "Harrison," Caldwell said, his voice trembling slightly. This is an ironclad indemnification clause, signed by a federal judge 3 weeks before your grandfather died. It legally severs the Willow Creek Trust from Pendleton Holdings entirely." "I don't care what it is," Harrison yelled, grabbing the paper. "We're taking it to the Supreme Court if we have to." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Harrison," Nora said, her voice cutting through the crisp air like a blade. She stepped right up to the gate, locking eyes with her cousin. "Grandpa Arthur knew you would try to steal this back once your empire collapsed. So he left a poison pill." Hayes pulled a second, much thicker dossier from his briefcase and held it up. Arthur Pendleton meticulously documented every instance of corporate embezzlement, offshore tax evasion, and wire fraud committed by the 2 of you over the last decade, Hayes explained smoothly. "This dossier contains irrefutable proof. If you file so much as a single legal motion contesting the ownership of Willow Creek Farm, a dead man's switch will automatically forward these documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the IRS, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence that fell over the gate was deafening. The wind rustled the dead leaves in the trees. Beatrice's knees buckled slightly, and she had to lean against the hood of the Escalade to keep from collapsing. "You're bluffing," Harrison whispered, though the terror in his eyes betrayed him. "Try me," Nora replied softly. "You have exactly 1 hour to get off my property before I have my security team physically remove you. You wanted the mansions, Harrison. You wanted the corporate empire. You mocked the mud. Now you get to live with the consequences." Nora turned her back on her family and walked slowly back toward the dilapidated farmhouse, leaving them standing on the wrong side of the reinforced gates. She could hear Beatrice openly weeping, and the sound of Caldwell furiously yelling at Harrison to get back in the car before they made things legally worse. In the months that followed, Nora completely transformed Willow Creek. She didn't build a flashy mansion to flaunt her wealth. Instead, she painstakingly restored the original Victorian farmhouse to its former, humble glory. The bunker remained her absolute secret, guarded by the best private security money could buy. She quietly sold off a few of the gold bars through Hayes's network, using the untraceable funds to set up anonymous philanthropic trusts that paid off medical debts for working-class families across the state. Meanwhile, Pendleton Holdings imploded spectacularly in the public eye. Harrison and Beatrice were forced into personal bankruptcy, their penthouses auctioned off for pennies on the dollar to satisfy furious creditors. They were left with absolutely nothing, a fitting end for two people who only ever understood the price of things and never the value. Nora Bennett had inherited the dirt, but in the end, she became the quietest, most powerful billionaire in the world. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are hidden beneath the very things arrogant people overlook. Nora's incredible journey proves that true wealth isn't about flashy mansions or corporate titles. It's about having the patience to look closer and the wisdom to understand true value. If you loved this story of ultimate karma and billionaire secrets, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good plot twist. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life dramas.